Liz Haswell, who will be from WashU, and she'll be talking about podcasting for community building and community broadening.
Yeah, to change the title, because that other title that you just said didn't even not sound right to me, like English language wise. Yeah, so I am like so inspired. I feel really weird following all these people doing these amazing things. Oh, yeah, sorry. All right, so I'm going to talk about podcasting. So how many people here have listened to a podcast before? So almost everybody. Maybe I should have said the question the other way around. Who hasn't listened to a podcast before? All right, so then we can sort of skip this first part, which is what is a podcast, and move on to the next thing, which is just a little bit of statistics to convince you that this is really a phenomenon worth considering. So according to the Pew Research Center in 2018, 44% of Americans over the age of 12 had listened to a podcast. That is a lot of people. And judging, if you can judge the popularity of a platform based on the number of apps that are developed, you can see those are all, that's just a snapshot of the number of podcast listening apps available. According to Podcast Insights, there are about over 500,000 active podcasts right now. So there's a lot of material out there, but less than 1,000 of those are science podcasts in the English language. So there's a huge opportunity here for education and outreach that I think we're just barely starting to grab a hold of. So a couple of reasons, these are retroactive reasons why to podcast. One is that access is high and barriers to access are low. So anybody who has an iPhone or any kind of phone, anybody who has access to the internet can access a podcast. Also, it looks like we have a really diverse audience. So on the right are some data from a 2017 survey from the Nielsen Corporation showing that essentially the spread of racial diversity among podcast listeners is not really that different from the U.S. population according to the census. So that means that we have a really diverse audience to work with. Now, whether podcasters are diverse is a different question. Also, the barriers to production and distribution are low. Otherwise, I would not be standing up here talking to you. That's pretty easy to get started. So there's sort of two things that you could do with a science podcast. And one is to do outreach in sort of the way that Jose defined it, share and discuss science within the scientific community. So your target audience is your colleagues, and you can communicate results, discuss them, and talk about implications to other people in your field. Another is to communicate to the public. So explaining the results of recent research to non-scientists. That's another type of science podcast. What we've been doing is a more social justice-oriented type of podcast where the main goal of our podcast is to provide information, resources, and community to people who are geographically or ideologically isolated, and to also secretly advocate for changes in policy, environment, or attitudes. So the podcast that I'm going to tell you about in a minute, we've sort of combined these two. We talk about research, and then we also advocate for change. So this is a podcast that Ivan Baxter, who's sitting right there, and I co-founded and currently co-host. It's called The Taproot. And the idea is to tell the stories behind the science. So we do tell a little bit of science, but really what we want to tell is how those stories got into publication. So the vision that we're meant to envision a taproot growing deep into the soil. So we're breaking through just that manuscript to tell all the stories about how that manuscript came into being. And just a little bit of history about how it came to be, without going into too much detail. Ivan and I pitched the idea for this podcast to ASPB or Plante in early 2017. So Plante is a digital platform for plant science worldwide. ASPB is the American Society for Plant Biology. And they were all about it, and they gave us a bunch of support. So over on the right-hand side, you can see Melanie Binder and Susan Cato on the top, and below you can see the famous Mary Williams. And those three women helped us really do a number of things. They did some editing, they support us on the website, they have given us some financial support, they've done advertising, they created that beautiful icon I showed you on the first slide, and so on and so on. We have 3 seasons starting in July, August of 2017. The 3rd season, as soon as we get our act in gear, it's gonna come out any day now. I've been saying since like July. But we are really gonna get it out, and every season we really have gotten a larger community together. More people are listening to it, and we think it's getting more and more successful. So as I mentioned, our intended audience really is young plant scientists. And our goals are to, as I mentioned, to tell the story behind the science, but really to normalize challenging experiences, to expose young people to what the real world of science is like, and to really help provide them with some examples of how to navigate it. Oh yeah, and we won an award that up there on top, they're holding the Excel Award. Okay, so just quickly, some of the topics that we covered in the first 2 seasons: open science, creating scientific consensus among big authorship lists, moving between academia and industry. That was your own Luca Comai who gave that seminar. Developing new technology. That was actually an interview with Jose. Dealing with mistakes, career mistakes that you wish you could take back. Handling uncertainty in career and in scientific results. Dealing with the pressure to move for science, getting back into science after taking a family-related career break. We talked about work-life balance, gender discrimination, and then probably our most popular, I think the episode that generated the most discussion was one on graduate student mental health, which is why I was like basically crying during your presentation, because it really came home how important an issue this is. I think you can see on the right, we've been combining the podcast with Twitter, so we have a social media platform as well as our digital media platform, and we've been combining those, I think, to provide content and then generate discussion on the topic. Advice for those of you who may be intrigued. I don't have a lot. If you have any questions about the technical aspects, you should ask Ivan and not me. But I would say you should start with a vision. What's the need and how are you going to fill it? I think that's one of the reasons we were successful, was that we really did know where we wanted to go from the beginning and what we were hoping to accomplish with the podcast. We had a structure for the season and for each episode to start with, which was helpful. Gather advice for sound equipment, editing, and so on, but not from me. Do a practice episode. But finally, in the end, just jump in and give it a try. Podcasting is super fun. It's super rewarding. And like I said, I really think there's a big audience out there for it. So